The cold had a particular way of settling into your bones when you had nowhere to go. Not the kind of cold you feel when you step outside for 30 seconds to grab your mail, or the kind that makes you pull your jacket tighter and think briefly that winter is romantic. This cold was different. It was patient. It crept in through the worn seams of my jacket, under the fraying collar, through the thin soles of my shoes that had seen better days. Better years, really. It moved slowly, like it had all the time in the world, because it did. The cold wasn't in any hurry. I, on the other hand, had nowhere else to be. Sycamore Park was quiet at this hour. The kind of quiet that cities only manage in the deep hours between midnight and 4 in the morning, when even the insomniacs have given up and the early risers haven't yet found reason to exist. A few distant street lamps turned the paths a dull amber. The trees were bare and skeletal, reaching up toward a sky that was more gray than black, the city's light pollution eating up any chance of stars. A pigeon or two shuffled somewhere in the dark, unimpressed by everything. I was sitting, well, more like folded, on a green wooden bench near the central fountain, which had been drained for winter. My bag was between my feet, one hand rested flat on my stomach. 5 months, give or take a few days. I hadn't been counting the weeks obsessively because counting made things feel more real, and real was something I was struggling to afford. The bump was still small enough to hide under loose clothing, but in the quiet of a night with no distractions, I could feel every centimeter of it. A pressure, a presence, something that had been mine before I knew what mine even meant. I pressed my palm flat and felt nothing in return, which was both reassuring and devastating, the way most things in my life had a habit of being. My name is Taylor Lopez, and 3 weeks ago I had an apartment. It hadn't been a good apartment. The radiator knocked in the night like something trapped inside it. The upstairs neighbor had a dog that apparently only needed to run laps between the hours of 11 and 2. The windows leaked cold air in thin, wheezing drafts, but it was mine. My name on a lease, my keys on a hook by the door, my handful of thrift store plates in a cabinet, my life arranged around me in a radius I controlled. Then Daniel happened. Not in the dramatic sense. Daniel didn't come in like a storm. He arrived the way certain disasters do. Slowly, then all at once. 3 months into our relationship, he moved in. 6 months in, his name had been added to the lease, for convenience. 8 months in, he decided that my pregnancy, unplanned, terrifying, mine, was inconvenient, and he'd made arrangements accordingly. By the time I understood what was happening, he had spoken to the landlord, signed papers, handed over keys, and left for a city 2,000 miles away, leaving behind a note that said, among other things, that he needed to figure himself out and that he hoped I understood. I did not understand. The landlord, a man with the warmth of a parking garage, had given me 2 weeks. I'd spent those 2 weeks calling every person I knew. My mother, who had her own crowded house and a partner who'd never taken to me. My college roommate, who was sympathetic but had 2 kids and a studio apartment. A handful of friends who were either in their own precarious situations or simply did not answer. I had $800 in my account, which was less than a month's deposit anywhere in this city, and a job at a bakery that paid $11 an hour, which I'd had to leave because standing for 8 hours was no longer something my body was doing without consequences. So here I was, on a bench, in Sycamore Park, because the shelter had a 3-week waiting list and the overnight warming center didn't open until 5. I pulled my bag closer with my foot, tucking it against my ankle, so I'd feel if anyone tried to move it while I dozed. My head dropped forward. My eyes burned. I was so tired that the tiredness had stopped feeling like tiredness and had started feeling like a kind of weight I carried inside my chest. I didn't mean to cry. I genuinely didn't. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No swelling music, no particular trigger. Just the cold and the dark and my hand on my stomach and the understanding, quiet and complete, that I had no idea what I was going to do. The tears came anyway, quietly, without making a scene. That was probably the first thing he noticed. I heard footsteps before I registered that they were approaching me specifically. They were even, unhurried, the sound of someone who was used to walking through space like it belonged to them. I looked up, blinking, trying to reassemble some version of dignity, and saw a man standing about 6 feet away on the path, stopped, looking at me. My first impression was that he was tall, genuinely tall, not just taller than me tall, though that bar wasn't high. He was wearing a dark overcoat that probably cost more than everything I owned. His hands were in his pockets. He had dark hair, slightly mussed, like he'd been running a hand through it, and a face that was, and I am not being literary here, I am being factual, objectively striking. The kind of face that belonged in architectural photography. Sharp jaw, dark eyes. He looked like someone who made decisions for a living. He was also looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, something more careful than that. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was low and even, an alpha voice. I could feel the secondary resonance of it, that low frequency thing that all alphas carried, the kind that made Omega's nervous systems pay attention whether they wanted to or not. Mine sat up straight inside me, like a small animal hearing a sound in the dark. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I'm fine. You're crying. I'm aware. On a park bench, he continued, not accusatory, just observational. At 3 in the morning. People sit on benches. My voice came out steadier than I expected. It's a park. He looked at me for a moment, then looked at my bag, then at the way I was sitting, and I could see him doing the math. People who were fine did not arrange themselves on benches the way I was arranged. There's a posture to homelessness, even temporary homelessness, that is distinct from the posture of someone who just needed fresh air. Everything about me said, I have nowhere else to be. Can I sit? He asked. I blinked. It's a public bench. He sat down on the far end, a careful distance away, not intrusive. He didn't look at me with the suffocating concern of someone about to offer a pamphlet. Then up and the pale non-sky above the trees, and was quiet for a moment. I couldn't sleep, he said. I walk when I can't sleep. Okay? Do you want me to leave? I looked at him sideways. This was strange, objectively strange. A man in a coat that cost several mortgage payments was sitting on a park bench at 3 in the morning, asking my permission to keep sitting. The world had not prepared me for this interaction. No, I said, mostly because the alternative was being alone with the cold and my thoughts had not been good company tonight. We sat there for a while without speaking. The city breathed its low industrial breath around us. Something small rustled in the bushes. My hand drifted back to my stomach without my consciously moving it, just the reflex I'd developed over the past few weeks, the same way you check a pocket where your keys are, even when you know they're there. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but I saw him notice. Is there somewhere you need to be? He asked, eventually. The word came out flat and final, and he accepted it without pressing. I'm Zach, he said. I looked at him. Taylor. He nodded like I'd said something sensible and went back to looking at the fountain. I don't know why I didn't immediately distrust him. By every reasonable calculation, I should have. Strange alpha, night, deserted park, me in a position of obvious vulnerability. My self-preservation instincts had been somewhat functioning until that point. But there was something about the way he'd asked permission to sit, the way he held his hands in his pockets and looked at the fountain instead of at me, that kept the alarm bells from going off. He wasn't performing generosity. He wasn't making me feel like a situation to be handled. He was just there, present, quiet, and something in me, some exhausted, overwhelmed, desperately tired part of me, needed someone to just be there. The warming center doesn't open until 5, I said, and I'm not sure why I said it, except that maybe some part of me was tired of performing fine when I wasn't fine. The cold had gotten into my honesty the same way it had gotten into my bones. He was quiet for a moment. 2 hours, he said. Yeah. Another pause. You should come inside, he said. Not, and he caught something in the way I went still. Not like that. There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. I'll get you a room. I stared at him. He turned to look at me then, directly. His eyes in the amber lamplight were dark and serious. You're pregnant and it's below freezing. I'm not making a pass at you. I'm telling you the bench is not a safe place to spend 2 hours, and I'd like to do something about that if you'll let me. The honesty of it knocked something loose in my chest. I wanted to say no. I had a whole speech prepared somewhere inside me about how I didn't take things from strangers, how I was handling it, how I didn't need anything. The speech was ready. My pride had been drafting it for weeks. What came out instead was, why? He considered this seriously, which I appreciated. He didn't immediately say because it's the right thing or because I want to help. He actually sat with the question. Because you're here, he said finally, and I'm here, and 2 hours is a long time in the cold. That was it. No grand philosophy, just geometry. I looked at my bag. I looked at the fountain. I felt the cold that had been patient all night working its way deeper. Okay, I said. The hotel was not just a hotel. I understood this when he walked me to the entrance, and the doorman said, Good evening, Mr. Kirk, without a flicker of surprise. and the lobby turned out to be the kind of lobby that had a fireplace in it. An actual fireplace, burning, at 3 in the morning. For what purpose I couldn't imagine, except to communicate that money was not a concern here. Was someone the night staff of a luxury hotel knew by name. He spoke to the front desk quietly and briefly. A card appeared. He handed it to me without ceremony. 12th floor. Room service is available all night. Get something to eat if you need it. The kitchen does it through the app. It's on the screen inside. I took the key card and turned it over in my fingers. I can't pay you back. I know, he said. That's fine. I'm not going to. I don't want you to have any expectations about Taylor. His voice was quiet and very steady. I'm not expecting anything. I'm going to walk home. You're going to sleep. That's the whole transaction. I looked at him. In the warm light of the lobby, he looked more real. Tired, I noticed. There were shadows under his eyes, but his expression was open, direct, uncomplicated. He meant what he said. Thank you, I managed. Something shifted in his face, subtle, like a door opening a crack. Get some sleep. He turned and walked back through the lobby doors. I stood there holding the keycard for 10 seconds, maybe 15, trying to process the last 30 minutes of my life. Then a very practical part of me pointed out that there was a warm room on the 12th floor, and I was an idiot if I stood in the lobby any longer. I went up. The room was, I don't have words for the room that don't sound like I'm describing a dream. A real bed, white pillows stacked 3 deep, a window that looked over the city, the lights laid out below like a map of somewhere important, a bathroom with towels that were heavy and warm, and a shower with pressure like a waterfall. I sat on the edge of the bed for 2 minutes and tried not to fall apart. Then I ordered soup from the room service app and ate it sitting cross-legged on the floor against the radiator because the radiator was warm and that felt more real than anything else in the room. And I stayed there until the sun started coming up and eventually, without meaning to, fell asleep against the wall. I woke up to a knock at the door and the very specific panic of someone who doesn't know where they are. Then I remembered. The bench. Zach Kirk, the keycard. I opened the door expecting, I don't know what, someone from the hotel maybe, telling me my time was up. It was Zach. He was wearing different clothes. He'd slept, or tried to. He was holding 2 coffees and looking at me with an expression that was carefully neutral. I thought you'd be gone, I said. I came back to check on you. A pause. The hotel called me when you ordered room service at 4 in the morning and didn't check out, which was flagged because the room was paid as a one-night stay. I felt my face heat. I'm sorry. I fell asleep. Don't apologize. He held out one of the coffees. Have you eaten? I had soup. Real food. Come down for breakfast. I looked at the coffee in his outstretched hand. I looked at him. The rational part of my brain, which had apparently been on sabbatical, returned to ask what exactly I was doing accepting hotel rooms and breakfast from a stranger. But the tired part of me, the part that had been cold for 3 weeks and scared for longer than that, said, just today. Just today, let someone be kind. I took the coffee. Breakfast was at a table by the window in the hotel's restaurant, which was the sort of place that had cloth napkins and tiny carafes of juice. I was acutely aware that I was in yesterday's clothes with my hair in a state that could generously be described as lived in. Zach didn't seem to register this. He ordered eggs and looked at the menu like a person who was thinking about what sounded good rather than what was cheapest. I ordered oatmeal because it seemed practical, and also because I'd been eating practical foods for weeks in the spirit of stretching money as far as it would go. You ordered oatmeal at a restaurant with a full kitchen, he observed. I like oatmeal. He looked at me over his coffee. You don't have to order the cheapest thing. I felt my jaw set. I'm not criticizing you, he said quickly. I'm just saying order what you actually want. I can tell you're calculating. I held his gaze for a moment. He held mine back. There was no judgment in it, just that same direct attention, like he was listening with his whole face. I've been calculating for 3 weeks, I said. It's a hard habit to break. He nodded slowly. What happened? I hadn't planned to tell him. I don't know what it was, the warm room, the real food, the sleep that had felt like surfacing from underwater. But things started coming out that I'd been keeping to myself because there was no one to tell. I told him about Daniel, the lease, the note, the 2-week countdown, the job I'd had to leave, the $800, now closer to $650 because I'd bought groceries and a bus pass and a prenatal vitamin supplement that cost more than I expected. The shelter wait list, the phone calls that hadn't been answered. He listened without interrupting. This was notable. Most people, when you tell them something difficult, start generating responses before you're done. You could see it in their faces, the words forming before you finished yours. Zach listened like he was actually waiting to understand before he said anything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How long have you been without a place? He asked. 5 days. Where have you been sleeping? Warming center for 2 nights, a 24-hour coffee shop for a night. The park last night. He looked at the table for a moment like he was working something out. I want to help, he said, not as charity, as an arrangement, if you're willing. I went cautious immediately. What kind of arrangement? I have a building on the east side, mixed residential and commercial. There's an apartment on the third floor that I use as an overflow space for staff, visiting contractors, that sort of thing. It's furnished. I've been meaning to rent it for 6 months and haven't gotten around to it. He paused. You could stay there while you get your situation figured out. In exchange, light administrative work. Nothing heavy. You said you'd been at the bakery. You clearly know scheduling and inventory. I need someone to manage correspondence and appointment logging for one of the smaller properties for a few hours a day, paid, not a favor. I stared at him. You own a building? Several, actually. You own several buildings, yes. And you were walking through a park at 3 in the morning. A slight tightening around the eyes. I walk when I can't sleep. I said that. You did. I put my hands flat on the table. I want to understand what's happening here, because this is the kind of story that ends badly for the person in my position. You're an alpha. I'm an omega. I'm pregnant and homeless, and you're offering me an apartment in exchange for work, and I need you to understand that I have to think about more than just myself right now. He looked at me steadily. That's the most reasonable thing anyone said to me in weeks. I'm serious. So am I. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not offering you this because I want something from you. I'm offering it because it's a resource I have that you need, and because I think you're someone who would actually do good work if given the chance. I have a lawyer. I have paperwork. We can put everything in writing, the apartment, the job, the terms, all of it. You have legal standing in any arrangement we make. You'd put it in writing? Everything. Terms of tenancy, employment, compensation, what either of us is and isn't obligated to. You keep your autonomy, you keep your options. If at any point it doesn't work for you, you walk away. I looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, the city was waking up. Morning commuters filling the sidewalks below. The ordinary machinery of a day beginning. Why? I asked, the same question as last night. And just like last night, he sat with it. My mother was an omega, he said. She raised my brother and me alone for the first 4 years of our lives. I know what the world looks like when you're in your position and nobody's made the right offer yet. He paused. I'm making the offer. Something settled in the room. Not a resolution exactly. More like a silence that had found its reason. I want to see the paperwork first, I said. Of course. And I want to talk to the lawyer myself, without you in the room. A slight pause, and then something that might have been the beginning of a smile. I can arrange that. And I stopped, steadied myself. I want it to be actual work. Real work. I'm not interested in being managed. If I'm taking on a job, I take it seriously, and I need you to take it seriously too. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said, and he said it like he meant it. I looked down at my oatmeal. I thought about the bench. I thought about the cold, and the waiting, and the $650, and the thing that was growing steadily, quietly inside me, the person who was going to need somewhere to come home to. All right, I said. Show me the paperwork. The apartment was on Harlow Street, in a building that Zach owned along with several other properties in the same neighborhood. He was not kidding when he said he owned half the city. That was hyperbole, but only somewhat. I looked him up on my phone while I waited for the paperwork to be drawn up, and found a company called Kirk Development that had been founded by his grandfather and built into something substantial by Zach and his brother Marcus over the last decade. Commercial properties, residential developments, a renovation project that had revitalized a 3-block stretch of the warehouse district. There were articles, photographs at ribbon cuttings, one profile in a business magazine that called him methodical and rarely wrong. The apartment on Harlow Street was not a palace. It was honest and clean and warm, with large windows and wood floors and a small kitchen that had everything a kitchen needed. It smelled like fresh paint and citrus, which turned out to be the cleaning products the building manager used. There were 2 rooms, a bathroom with a deep soaking tub, and a view of the street below where a woman walked a very determined small dog every morning at 8. I stood in the center of it, and felt something crack open in my chest. I am not going to pretend I was graceful about it. I managed to hold it together through the building tour, through meeting Marcus Kirk very briefly in the lobby downstairs, a taller version of Zach with easier manners and an immediate, genuine smile, through the signing of papers that Zach's lawyer walked me through clearly and carefully while Zach waited in another room exactly as I'd asked. I held it together right up until the building manager, a brisk woman named Donna, who smelled like coffee and efficiency, handed me the keys and said, "Welcome home," like it was nothing. Then I stood alone in the apartment and let it out. Not loud, not dramatic, just a long, quiet unraveling of all the tension I'd been carrying for weeks, the kind that doesn't stop until it decides it's done. I sat on the floor in the middle of the empty living room and pressed both hands over my stomach and breathed until I could breathe normally. The baby moved. Just a flutter. Barely there, like a word just at the edge of hearing. I'd felt it a handful of times before, always when I was very still, always in moments like this one. It never got less extraordinary. "Okay," I said, out loud, to the empty room and the flutter, and the keys in my other hand. "Okay, we have a place to be." The job started on a Monday. Zach had a small management office in the same building, 2 floors above mine, which I hadn't known when I moved in, and which felt for exactly one paranoid moment like a setup. Then Donna explained that the office had been there for 12 years and that Mr. Kirk was in and out about 3 days a week when he wasn't at the main office across town, and the paranoid moment passed. The work was real. He hadn't been performing because he needed someone to manage correspondence and appointment logging. The overflow for his smaller properties had apparently been handled by an assistant who'd left for another city 2 months prior, and the gap was showing. There were emails that needed sorting and responding to. There were maintenance schedules that needed coordinating. There was a building on the south end that had a complicated heating system issue requiring multiple contractors, and someone needed to be the point of contact. I liked it. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I liked being the person who held the information, who knew what was happening and when. I liked building a schedule from chaos. The bakery had been similar in some ways. You were always tracking multiple things at once, always 3 steps ahead, but this felt more mine, somehow. More like something I was building rather than just maintaining. Zach and I crossed paths 2 or 3 times a week. He was almost always on his phone, or coming from somewhere, or heading to somewhere, moving through the building with the contained efficiency of someone who was perpetually in the middle of a decision. But he always stopped when he saw me. Not to check on me, in the overbearing sense, just stopped, said hello, asked how the morning was going, listened to the answer. It took me a few weeks to understand that he actually listened. Not in the polite nodding way where someone is already forming their next sentence. He listened like you were telling him something he needed to know. He had opinions too, clear ones, but he didn't override. He'd say, "I'd do it differently," and then actually explain why, and then actually incorporate your response into what he did next. It was the strangest thing. It made working with him feel like a conversation rather than a hierarchy. 4 weeks in, I told him the heating system issue on South Point was going to keep recurring unless they replaced the main coupling, not just patch the secondary valve. "You figured this out from the maintenance logs?" The same valve was addressed 3 times in the last 18 months. It's not a valve problem, it's pressure regulation. The coupling is cheap to replace compared to what you'll spend on emergency callouts. He was quiet for a moment, reading. Then he looked up. "How do you know this?" "My uncle was an HVAC technician. I spent 2 summers in high school tagging along." Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly, more like pieces being rearranged. "Get me a quote for the coupling replacement," he said. "We'll move forward." It was done by the following week. The valve never came up again. Marcus Kirk came to the building for a meeting in my 6th week, and I encountered him in the small kitchen on the office floor, where he was eating a sandwich and looking at his phone with great intensity. He looked up when I walked in and immediately smiled. It was different from Zach's expression. Where Zach was measured, Marcus was immediately warm, the kind of person whose face led with openness. "You're Taylor," he said, "the one who solved the South Point heating problem." I pointed at a coupling. Zach described it differently. He put down his sandwich. He said you'd identified a systemic issue that 4 different contractors had missed. That's not pointing at a coupling. I poured my water and tried not to look uncomfortable. I had context they didn't. Marcus was watching me with an expression that was thoughtful, a little appraising, and not unfriendly. He talks about your work, he said. That's unusual, is it? Zach's thorough, but he's not given to enthusiasm. If something merits mention, that usually means it's genuinely good. I didn't know what to do with that, so I thanked him and went back to my desk. I didn't think about it. I actively chose not to think about it. The pregnancy was moving through its second trimester, which meant several things. It meant I was getting bigger in ways that were no longer concealable under looser shirts. It meant I was sleeping better, but waking up twice a night to use the bathroom. It meant that the nausea of the early weeks had faded, replaced by a more reasonable relationship with food, and an unreasonable craving for certain specific things, including, embarrassingly, the very specific kind of cinnamon toast that my grandmother used to make on Sunday mornings, which I had been trying to recreate for 2 weeks with mixed success. It also meant that I was starting to let myself feel things I'd been holding at arm's length. Things like, what next? What happens when the baby comes? What the shape of a life was supposed to look like, going forward, as a single Omega parent with no family safety net and a job that, however good, was still relatively new. I thought about Daniel less than I expected to. The anger had burned through early, clean and total, leaving behind something cooler, a clarity almost. He had removed himself from the situation, which was genuinely the most useful thing he'd ever done for me. What I thought about instead, and tried not to, was Zach. Not in a fantasy sense. I want to be honest about this. It wasn't romantic daydreaming or projection. It was more like noticing. The way he stood at the window in his office sometimes, thinking, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand because he'd forgotten it was there. The way he talked about the buildings, not like properties, like living things, with histories and problems and potential. The way he'd asked my permission to sit on a bench at 3 in the morning when he could have just sat. There was a quality to him that I kept coming back to, a consistency. He was the same in every context I saw him. Same with Donna, with Marcus, with contractors, with me. Not identical. He adjusted his register, became more precise in technical conversations, more direct in financial ones, but the underlying frequency was constant. He didn't perform differently for different audiences. He was just himself, in whatever room he was in. I found that extraordinarily difficult to look away from. I was working late one evening in late November, trying to clear a backlog of correspondence before the Thanksgiving week, when I heard someone come into the office and assumed it was Donna doing her last round. Then I heard Zach's voice. "You're still here." I checked the time. 7:42. I wanted to finish the Carlisle correspondence. He set his bag down at the other desk and pulled off his coat. He looked tired. He'd had meetings downtown all day, and it showed in the slight loosening of his posture. The way his shoulders had come down half an inch from their default position. "The Carlisle tenant issue?" he asked. Resolved. Mrs. Carlisle and the upstairs neighbor agreed to a noise schedule. I typed up a formal agreement, both parties signed, copies filed. The maintenance request she was using as a leverage complaint is also scheduled for the 14th. He looked at me. "You negotiated a noise agreement between two tenants. It seemed more efficient than letting it escalate to legal." "It is more efficient." He sat down slowly in the chair across from me. "How are you doing that? Anticipating the escalation?" People tell you what they actually want if you listen for it long enough. Mrs. Carlisle doesn't actually care about the noise that much. She's lonely since her daughter moved out. She wanted someone to take her seriously. Once she felt heard, the rest was easy. Zach was quiet for a moment, looking at me. Not in the cataloging way. More like the listening way, he asked, and the shift in tone made it clear he wasn't asking about the Carlisle file. I looked at my screen. Fine. Getting bigger. Very tired, the usual. "Have you got everything you need? For the baby?" I don't know what the practical list is. Something tightened briefly in my chest. "I've been sourcing secondhand mostly. There are apps. You can find almost everything. The big things, the crib, the stroller, for almost nothing if you're patient." But I looked up at him. He had that listening face on. "There's a crib I found," I said, a little reluctantly. "It's good, safe. Not secondhand. The secondhand ones need safety checks I can't do myself, and I'm not going to risk it. It's $300, and I have the money. I've been putting things aside. Haven't pulled the trigger yet, because every time I'm about to spend that kind of money, I run the math again." "The math works," he said. "I know, I stopped. Old habits." He was quiet. Then, order it. I wasn't asking for. I know you weren't. His voice was steady. I'm telling you that you have money in the bank. The math works, and you're allowed to spend $300 on something that matters. That's not advice, it's just accurate. Something about the simplicity of it. Not charity, not an offer, just a statement of fact, made the tightness in my chest ease. Okay, I said. I ordered the crib that night. The city got beautiful in December, which seemed unfair. Lights appeared on every surface. The park where I'd slept on a bench 6 weeks before was now strung with white lanterns, and couples walked the paths with their hands in each other's coats, and children ran toward the ice rink they'd built around the empty fountain. I walked through it on my lunch break sometimes and thought about how different the same piece of geography could look, depending on when you arrived. Zach found me there on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on a different bench, a small, involuntary symmetry that I appreciated, eating a sandwich and watching someone's toddler attempt the complicated physics of chasing pigeons. The bump was fully undeniable now, round and warm under my coat, one hand resting on it automatically. He sat down beside me, not at the far end this time, maybe 2 feet away. Marcus thinks I should tell you something, he said, without preamble. I looked at him. That's a concerning start. He says I've been very obvious, and I might as well be direct. He looked at the toddler and the pigeons. I'm not sure I agree with his assessment, but I respect his opinion enough to consider it. The sandwich was suddenly very interesting. Obvious about what? I said carefully. About the fact that I think about you significantly more than the professional context requires. The toddler fell down, got immediately back up. The pigeon did not wait for this and left. I turned to look at Zach. He was looking at me now, direct and steady as always, with that expression I'd been trying to read for 6 weeks. Up close, in the winter afternoon light, I could finally see what it was. It was careful. It was somebody trying very hard to be honest, while also giving you every exit. I'm 5 months pregnant, I said. I know. With another person's baby, I know. I'm also your employee. An issue I've been thinking about extensively. The job isn't contingent on this conversation going either way. Donna is your direct supervisor. The arrangement exists independently. I want that clear. I looked at the park, the lights and the bare trees, the ice rink and the fountain. I don't know what I'm doing with my life, I said. I have a plan for the next 4 months that accounts for the baby's arrival. After that, it becomes significantly less certain. I'm not someone who has things sorted out right now. I'm aware, he said. I'm not asking you to have things sorted. I'm telling you where I am. What you do with it is entirely your business. And what you are is someone who would like the chance to know you better. Outside this. He gestured at the building, the office, the professional arrangement. If you want that. The wind moved through the trees and the lights shifted. I thought about the bench and the cold and the way he'd asked my permission before sitting down. I thought about the space he'd made for me consistently and without theater every time we'd been in the same room. I thought about how I'd learned, slowly, that trust was built in small, specific moments rather than in declarations, and how the small, specific moments had been accumulating for 6 weeks. I'm terrible at restaurants, I said. I always order wrong. A pause. Then, something very quiet in his voice. I know a place that's hard to order wrong at. I can't stay out late. I'm in bed by 9:30. That's fine. I'm going to be distracted by a lot of practical things for the foreseeable future. I'm good at practical things. I looked at him. He looked at me. The lights were on in all the trees. Okay, I said, for the 3rd time, to this person in this park. Some things found a word and kept it. The restaurant was a small Italian place 2 streets over from Harlow that had been there for 40 years and knew it. Red check tablecloths, candles and wine bottles, a menu with 4 pasta options, and a handwritten daily special that changed based on what the kitchen felt like making. The ordering problem solved itself because everything sounded good and there was nothing performative about the choices. I don't know how to compress 3 hours into something small. I'll say instead that he told me about his grandmother, who had built the first Kirk property with her own savings over 20 years and handed it to his grandfather, who'd had the sense to know what he had. He told me about his brother's particular talent for seeing the human angle in every business problem, how Marcus had saved 3 tenant relationships that Zach had been on the verge of handling badly. He told me about how he didn't sleep well, had never slept well, and how walking at night had started in college when the insomnia first became serious and had never quite stopped. I told him about my grandmother's cinnamon toast, which he found very funny for some reason, and then admitted that he was an obsessive about making good toast, that toast had a correct texture and most people didn't bother to achieve it. Tell me you don't have a specific toaster, I said. I have a very specific toaster. You own half a city, and you've strong opinions about toast. Owning half a city is exactly how you develop strong opinions about toast. When everything else is complicated, you want the toast to be right. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised me. He watched it with an expression that was warm. That's the only word. The guard down, just slightly, just enough to see what was underneath, which was warmth. We walked back slowly. It was cold but manageable, the kind of winter cold that feels friendly when you're dressed for it and in good company. He didn't take my hand, didn't reach for me, walked at my pace, which had slowed in the last month because everything had slowed, and didn't make a thing of it. At my door, I turned to face him. This was good, I said. It was. He was doing that thing where he gave me all the exits. I looked up at him for a moment, at that face that had been the first thing I'd seen when I'd been sitting on the bench with nowhere to go, and did something I'd been considering for approximately 72 hours. I went up on my toes and kissed him, once, brief, on the corner of his mouth. When I pulled back, something in his face had opened completely. Not surprise exactly, more like release, like someone who had been holding very still so as not to startle something, and had just been given permission to breathe. Good night, Zach, I said. Good night, Taylor, he said, in a voice that was quieter than usual, and stood there until I'd closed the door. I pressed my back against the door inside and let out a long breath. The baby moved. I know, I told it. Me too. What followed was not a fairy tale in the traditional sense. It was better than that. It was real. Real meant that we had our first argument 2 weeks later, about something small and logistical. A scheduling conflict that had cascaded because of a miscommunication between me and a contractor, and Zach's response was too clipped, too sharp, and I told him so in terms that I was later slightly embarrassed by, but that were also entirely accurate. He came to my apartment that evening and apologized without qualifications or explanations. Not "I'm sorry but," or "I'm sorry if," just "I was short with you and that wasn't fair." I told him it was fine. He said it wasn't, and he wanted to be better at it. You don't have to be perfect, I said. I'm not performing patience here. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking myself. That was Zach Kirk, in 4 sentences, really. That was the whole of him. Real meant that Marcus took me to coffee one afternoon in February, and we talked for 2 hours without Zach in the room. And I learned that Zach had been in one serious relationship that had ended badly several years prior. Not because anyone was villainous, but because they'd wanted different things and stayed too long past the knowing. Marcus was telling me this not as a warning, I understood, but as context, an explanation for the care, the slowness, the extraordinary deliberateness with which Zach moved toward things that mattered. He doesn't do anything halfway, Marcus said. He never has, which means he also doesn't start things he doesn't intend to see through. I thought about that. Real meant that Zach came with me to 2 prenatal appointments in March, sitting in the waiting room with his coat folded on his lap, and a building report he was ostensibly reading and clearly wasn't, and coming in when I asked him to, and standing next to me in the small curtain space when the doctor found the heartbeat and pressed the wand to my stomach, and that particular sound filled the room, that rushing, urgent, astonishing sound, and turning to find him looking at the monitor with an expression so unguarded that I had to look away. Afterward, in the parking lot, I said, "You don't have to pretend this doesn't affect you." I wasn't pretending. I mean, I stopped. Started again. It's okay for it to mean something. It means something to me. I don't know what shape that takes for you, but you don't have to manage your expression around it. He looked at me. The afternoon sun was very bright. It meant something, he said. It means something. I took his hand. He held it, carefully, like something he intended to keep. The baby came in April. Early, not dangerously, just eager, which I chose to take as a personality preview. I called Zach at 2 in the morning, which was the only time I called anyone at 2 in the morning, and he answered on the second ring, voice clear and immediate, like he'd been awake. "I'm coming," he said, before I'd finished the sentence. He was there in 11 minutes. I will not perform a clinical description of labor, because it is not a clinical experience. I will say that it was long and very hard, and that Zach was there the whole time, holding my hand when I wanted him to, stepping back when I needed space, refilling my ice chips with a focus that suggested he had found something useful to do and was committing to it fully. He didn't say any of the things people say. He didn't tell me I was doing great, or that it would be over soon. He mostly said nothing, which was exactly right. He said one thing, near the end, when things were difficult and I was very tired, and had said something along the lines of, I can't do this, which is a thing you say in those moments that isn't true, but needs to be received seriously. You can, he said, not cheerfully, not with false brightness, just with the quality that was his most essential quality, that steadiness, that certainty. You've been doing it for 9 months. This is just the last part. The last part. At 4:47 in the morning, on a Wednesday in April, a very small, very loud person arrived in the world with immediate strong opinions about the proceedings. The doctor placed him, on my chest. I felt the weight of him, small and warm and absolutely real, against my heart. His face was scrunched and furious, and then gradually, over 30 seconds, settled into something that looked like curiosity. I held him and could not speak, could not form a word, could only hold on. Zach was on my left. I don't know what he looked like in that moment because I couldn't look anywhere else, but I felt his hand find my shoulder, rest there, warm and steady as always. Hi, I said to the baby, barely a whisper. Hi, I'm your parent. I've been waiting for you. The baby looked at me. He was skeptical, maybe, or just still figuring out how eyes worked. He has your eyebrows, Zach said, very quietly. I laughed, wet and surprised. He's 20 minutes old. He doesn't have eyebrows. He absolutely has eyebrows. They're already doing the thing yours do when you're thinking. Babies don't think. This one has an opinion, Zach said. Look at him. I looked. The small, furious face had relaxed into something more receptive. The eyebrows were actually doing something. Eli, I said, a name I'd had in my pocket for weeks, tried out and returned to and finally settled on. Eli Lopez. The name held itself in the air. Complete. Zach made a sound that was not quite a word, something that started in his chest. I looked at him finally. His eyes were wet. He was making no effort to manage this, no effort to reassemble the careful expression. He was just there, fully, completely there, in all of it. Eli was 3 months old the first time I left him with Zach overnight. This was not casual. I had a list. The list had 16 items on it, organized by urgency with supplementary notes. I went over it with Zach twice. He listened to both recitations without pointing out that he'd been spending 4 evenings a week at my apartment for 4 months and was familiar with Eli's routines. If he won't settle, I said, for the third time standing by the door. Ear rub. Left ear specifically. I know. And if he's hungry after 11? Second shelf. Already labeled. Taylor. He looked at me with that direct, steady attention. Go sleep. I had a hotel room for the night, a different hotel than the first one, a smaller one just far enough away to constitute a genuine break. The community center where I now worked part-time, managing facility operations, had insisted I take a night after I'd worked 3 14-hour weeks. I stood at the door for another 10 seconds. I know you know, I said. You built him from nothing, Zach said, and you've been taking care of him alone since day one. Leaving for one night doesn't undo that. I looked at him. He had Eli in one arm, the way he'd learned to hold him, slightly tilted, which was the position Eli preferred. Eli was looking at the ceiling with great seriousness. You're very good at that. The thing you do where you say the thing I actually need to hear. Something warm in his face. Go sleep, Taylor. I went. I slept for 9 hours. It was the longest uninterrupted sleep I'd had in 4 months, and it was transcendent. When I came back in the morning, Eli was asleep in his crib, and Zach was on my couch with a building report across his chest, and his eyes closed, not quite asleep, surface resting the way he described sleeping, close to consciousness, but not in it. He'd made coffee. The apartment smelled like coffee and something warm, and sunlight was moving across the floor in the particular morning way it had in this apartment. And I stood in the doorway and understood something. This was it. This was the thing, not the dramatic version, not the declaration version, just this, the apartment that I'd made mine, the sleeping baby in his room, this person on my couch who had found me on a bench and asked permission to sit and never once asked for anything I wasn't ready to give. I poured myself a coffee and sat in the armchair near the couch and waited. His eyes opened after a few minutes. He saw me. A slow, undone smile crossed his face, the sleepy version of him that was the most unguarded, the one I'd been quietly cataloging for months. Hi, I said. How did you sleep? Exceptionally. I curled my feet underneath me. Thank you. He sat up. Eli woke up at 2 and at 4:30. Both times, ear left side, it worked. He's been out since 5. You should sleep more. I slept on your couch. That counts. It does not count as sleep. It counts as something. He looked at me with those morning eyes. I have something I want to ask you. Something in my chest turned over. Slowly. Like a page. Okay, I said. I've been thinking about whether I was going too fast. You've been thinking about this for a while, I said. I can tell. I have. He rubbed the back of his neck. A rare concession to uncertainty. I know the situation has been specific, and I don't want you to feel like anything was. Zach. I put my coffee down. Ask. He looked at me. In the morning light, with the sleep still in his face, he looked like himself without any of the architecture. Just him. I want to stay, he said. Not temporarily. Not because of the situation. I want this. You, Eli, this apartment with the morning light, your lists that have too many items, your grandmother's cinnamon toast that you still haven't perfected. I've almost perfected it. You haven't, and I've been trying not to say anything for 2 months. Something loosened in his face, almost a laugh. I want to be here. All of it, if you want that too. The sun moved across the floor. In the other room, Eli made a small sound and went quiet again. I thought about the bench and the cold and the particular patience of that night. I thought about all the ways a person could find themselves in a place they didn't plan for, and how the place you didn't plan for sometimes turned out to be the only one that fit. You're going to have to give me the toaster, I said. If you're moving in, I need the toaster. A pause. A beat. His whole face. Done, he said. I went to the couch and sat beside him, and he put his arm around me, and I put my head against his shoulder, and we sat in the morning light and listened to the apartment and the city and the sound of Eli beginning to wake up, that small warm noise, the announcement of a day beginning. I'm going to need help with the toast, I admitted after a while. I know. Don't be smug about it. I'm not going to be smug about it. You already are. Slightly, he allowed. From the other room, Eli was now fully awake and had opinions about it. Zach stood, and I stood, and we went together. 6 months later, I got my first piece of mail addressed to Taylor Lopez Kirk, which I hadn't asked for, and Zach claimed not to have orchestrated, which I did not entirely believe. The mail was a catalog for home goods, which was the least romantic possible vessel for a significant moment, and I stood at the mailbox in the lobby, holding it for 2 full minutes, while Donna pretended to check something on her phone behind me. Did you know about this? I asked her. I mind my own business, she said, in the tone of a person who does not remotely mind their own business. I took the catalog upstairs. Zach was working at the kitchen table, Eli on his lap, both of them apparently examining a spreadsheet with great seriousness. Eli had recently discovered that touching the laptop screen was tremendously satisfying, which had led to several complicated conversations about personal property, and also the discovery that Eli found the word no to be extremely entertaining. Mail for you, Zach said, without looking up. Mail addressed to Taylor Lopez Kirk, I said. He looked up. I didn't do that, he said. I know you did that. Something crossed his face. A concession. I may have filled out the tenant information card as Lopez Kirk. You may have. I thought it had a good sound. His voice was carefully neutral in the way it was carefully neutral when he was trying not to be pleased with himself. Hyphenation maintains both lineages. It seemed logical. You're not logical, you're a romantic. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Eli, who had no opinion on hyphenation but strong opinions on being ignored, slapped the laptop screen firmly. No, Zach said automatically. Eli laughed. An actual full laugh, delighted. I looked at the catalog, at the name on it, at the two of them at the kitchen table, at the window with the morning light and the crib in the other room that had been worth every dollar, and the toaster on the counter that made excellent toast. He'd been right. It made excellent toast. I'd surrendered this point, and the keys on the hook by the door. My keys, on my hook, by my door. In my life, which had shape again, and warmth, and something that felt increasingly like its own intention. Lopez Kirk, I said. Good sound, he said. Don't be smug. I'm not being smug. You're absolutely being smug. It has a good sound, he said again, and smiled. And it was the undone one, the real one, the one I'd been quietly collecting since January. I sat down across from them. Eli immediately redirected his attention to me, reaching, which was still new enough to be astonishing every time. Hi, I told him. Hi, Eli. He grabbed my finger with both hands and did not let go. That was his method. That was apparently also mine. The fountain was running again. Spring had come back to the city in its particular way, loud and green and insistent, the park remade from its winter version, the paths full of people and dogs, and children who did not appreciate being restrained in strollers. The ice rink was gone, the lanterns were gone, the bench was just a bench. I was sitting on it. Eli was in the stroller beside me, asleep after a morning of extremely committed crawling, one fist pressed to his cheek. He slept loudly, in small breaths, with total commitment. I kept my hand on the stroller handle, out of reflex. Footsteps on the path. Even, unhurried. Zach sat down beside me, 2 cups of coffee from the cart by the east entrance. He handed me one. "He asleep?" he asked. Finally, I looked at Eli. He was awake by 5:30. I heard. He settled back on the bench. I was there. "Were you?" I was barely conscious. We sat for a while. The fountain ran. A couple walked past with a dog, who was very interested in the pigeons. A child ran in circles for no discernible reason. The city did its ordinary thing around us. "I sat on this bench," I said. "I know. Over there." I gestured. Different bench, same park. He looked at the other bench, then at me. "I know," he said. Again, not the bad part. Just the part where you sat down and you asked. I held the coffee. "You asked if you could sit. It was 3 in the morning, and I was alone, and you asked. It seemed right to ask. It was." I looked at him. It was the right thing. Everything after that was because of that. He looked at me for a moment, with that face, the full presence of it. "I walked past this park every night for 6 months before that," he said. "Different route every night because I couldn't sleep. That night I went left at the corner instead of right, and ended up at the south entrance instead of the north. If I'd gone right, I'd have come out 2 blocks over and missed the park entirely. I absorbed this. You'd never walked that route before?" "Never." He looked at the fountain. "My brother says there are 2 ways to understand that. Either it means nothing, statistical noise, randomness, no narrative, or it means the world is shaped a particular way and you end up where you're supposed to be." He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said, "that I went left at the corner and I ended up here." He looked at me. Then at Eli sleeping in the stroller. "I think I'll take either explanation." Eli stirred, not waking, just shifting, resettling, something in his sleeping self checking in and finding things as they should be. I put my hand over Zach's on the bench between us. The fountain ran. The pigeons shuffled. The city moved around us in its indifferent, extraordinary way. And we sat in the center of it, at a bench in a park, in the beginning of a life that neither of us had planned for. All the best ones start this way, I think. Not with a plan, with someone asking, quietly, in the dark, "Can I sit?" And someone else saying, "Yes, if you made it to the end, you're my kind of person." Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me.